Welcome to the Black Voice. It's time to get real. We are here to motivate and promote positive change for Black culture. And this is a show featuring you. Call into the show 24/7 at anchor.fm/blackvoicej. From there, hit message and you can be heard on future episodes. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe and rate on Spotify or Apple Podcasts to be sure you don't miss any future episodes. This is the Black Voice with Jay Clark. Y'all stay tuned. The following message is from our sponsor, Negrities. Negrities is a family-owned and operated Afrocentric apparel boutique, celebrating the beauty of Blackness and the power of melanin. Find Negrities on Instagram at Negrities. That's NEGRATEES. Or shop at etsy.com/shop/Negrities. That's etsy.com/shop/Negrities. Welcome to the Black Voice. Today I'm joined by two very special guests. I'm thankful for them being with me today. I have Bruce Jackson here with me, who's an active professor in Spanish and Italian at the University of Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. As well, I have my guy Kiko here, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in Latin and Caribbean literature. So I welcome them both to the show. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
No problem. We're going to touch on a couple different topics. Kiko, if you would just let the people know on the dissertation that you've been working on, I think was really interesting.
Yes. So my specialty is gender, race, and sexuality in Latin American and Caribbean. But my dissertation encompasses the Black male characterization, but more from a psychological standpoint, because traditionally in Latin American and Caribbean literature, the Black man is viewed in essential terms as far as his body, musculature, but not really his psychological abilities. And so I'm trying to change that trend to represent a more contemporary characterization of that persona.
Absolutely. And that's so interesting to me, if I could comment on it, because, I mean, the Black man is always described as this physical brute, his strength, his power, his force, but it's never, attacked from a intellectual standpoint, his, what's going on inside of his head. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the completion. I hope that's something I can get my hands on myself. I'd love to check that out.
You can for sure, and it'll be published in English so everyone can be able to read it.
For sure. We're going to dive right into some of these topics. So we kind of talked, Bruce and I, about some things we wanted to touch on today. We're going to take it straight to the nitty gritty. So interracial marriages, this is something that, of course, in this climate has been talked about. Can you be a BLM supporter and be in an interracial relationship? What are the ins and outs of that? So I propose that question to you guys. Can a person be pro-BLM, pro-Black Lives Matter, and also be in a relationship, a marriage outside of their race?
Oh, Kiko, I'll let you start. I think you are.
touchy.
I guess in this case, I'm the case study because
yeah.
I'm married to a white woman, and we have 2 kids together. To answer the question, absolutely. It doesn't change my Blackness. I'm still a Black man, and I'm still enduring the experiences as all people of color are. Every single day, we have to walk in the streets, and people are going to view us a certain way. So my personal views, I don't see any difference or conflict between someone being in an interracial relationship and Black Lives Matter.
Well, I would agree with Kiko, and I would add that I think simply in terms of the sheer number of whites that we've seen participating and allying around Black Lives Matter, that we should appreciate any union, I think, between white and blacks. But I think we should celebrate those ties and allies between whites and blacks and not diminish them in any way.
And that's something we previously talked about in an interview on this show. Is we got so much support, man. So much support from every community, all races. This has evolved into a human movement. You know, Black Lives Matter 5 years ago was, you know, I was probably 75% Black folks, you know, hooting and hollering, you know, fighting to be heard. But it seems that this time around, not only all races are joining, all countries. I mean, there's worldwide protests, there's worldwide, you know, advocacy and support for Black people in America, which is crazy. You know, you never thought you would see something or so. Um, but with interracial marriages, you know, I kind of switched scripts. So we're at the cookout. We at the cookout, y'all. I'm painting a picture for you. You walking into the cookout, your cousin TJ comes in, and he's in an interracial marriage. And your cousin Boo Boo comes in, and he's in a gay relationship. Who is ostracized more at the family cookout between those two parties?
The gay relationship, I think. Bruce and I, we've talked about this a little bit ourselves. The homophobia within the Black community and the transphobia, the LGBTQIA phobia. I think that culturally in our communities, I think that's still viewed as a taboo, and I think religion has a lot to do with the non-acceptance of different sexualities that aren't cis, straight. And that's a problem that we're going to continue to have. And it's also probably one of the criticisms that I would have of Black Lives Matter, as far as not having all the different intersectionalities of Blackness represented as well. But I do understand that in the moment, police brutality, that's the main message. But I think we will have to eventually branch off into other issues within the Black community as well.
Word.
I would agree. I think the Black community has certainly, in terms of its acceptance of homosexuality, of the LGBTQ community, the majority of the Black community is still widely conservative in terms of LGBTQ issues, and I think we have a long way to go in terms of that. And I would just say that I hope that, you know, to our fellow listeners out there, that we do make a better effort, that we do try harder to accept and bring into the fold our LGBTQ community, because I think until we are all appreciated and valued, I don't know how authentic we can be about Black Lives Matter until we're all a part of that movement.
Absolutely.
LGBTQ included.
Absolutely. And this is a conversation that was necessary, and we want to have. We want to make it clear that we're here to understand. You know, we're not singling out, like, this isn't that type of conversation. We all, I think, is a consensus that we truly believe we can't fight this great fight and leave our loved ones behind, leave our brothers and sisters behind just because, you know, they happen to think differently than us. Give us a sense of geography, guys. I know, Bruce, you're out in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, correct?
I am. Mm-hmm.
And Kiko, where you posted?
I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Knoxville. So just let us know, you know, what is the temperament of the current times as far as the BLM movement, as far as social justice, in relation to what you guys are saying.
Well, I would say that, of course, like in most cities across the U.S., I think it's safe to say that the Black Lives Matter movement is still visible here, but it, of course, is not as visible as it was a week or two ago. But there are still efforts here locally and groups that are out there fighting for racial justice and equity. Here, just last night, there was a protest and rally around the abolitionist project here and the defunding of the police. So there's still a presence out there, and it really does give hope around the movement that things will finally change. And I think in the beginning, one of my big concerns and big questions was whether this was going to be a movement or a moment. And I think we are seeing, perhaps it's still too early, but I think we are seeing that Black Lives Matter movement is a movement in its own right, and more than a moment. And I'm encouraged and optimistic about what I'm seeing here locally. You can definitely see that the move towards a more equitable society is still very, very, very much there and visible.
Dev, how is it down there in Knoxville, Kiko?
Well, on the contrary to what Bruce was describing, we had some advocacy earlier in the process. I'd say about a strong 3 weeks after the Floyd murder. But my wife, she's been to 2 protests. But really, honestly, after Juneteenth, things have really cooled down in Knoxville. There's an Appalachia feel about it. This part of Tennessee varies a lot, even from West and Middle Tennessee, because we're in Appalachia. And so there's a lot of resistance against Black Lives Matter here. I must say, I wear my Black Lives Matter face guard when I go out in public. I get a lot of stares. I get a lot of sneers. I've had experiences with my kids at an ice cream parlor, and people have their freedom blue line symbols, their don't tread on me symbols. Those are very prevalent here. We actually have counter protests here the last few weeks against the whole Black Lives Matter movement to sort of promote this right-wing conservatism that's going on and that's been around, ever since the Trump election in 2016.
I think that's interesting. There, you Kiko, you talk about the counter protests. I've participated in several protests in the last couple of nights here, and I mean not only protests but rallies and educational experiences, right? And I've yet to see any counter protests. So I think that certainly speaks to the ambience in Tennessee.
East Tennessee,
yeah.
For sure. But also because it's a very bubbled environment. It's always going to be like this, whether it's North Carolina, Tennessee, whether it's Illinois. There's just certain pockets like that, especially where I'm from in Franklin, Tennessee, which experienced one of the most intense battles of the Confederacy in the Civil War, the Battle of Franklin. 20,000 people died in that battle. And still to this day, there's a glorification. There's a lot of Civil War memorabilia that represents the town, but it also has a non-Southern feel to it too, because we have a lot of people implanted from the North, from the West. We have a lot of people that migrated from Central America. But then you go 30 miles south of where I'm from in Franklin, and it's almost Alabama is a very super conservative feel about it. The Klan still marches in those areas 50 miles from where I'm from to the south.
And I think an important word you just said there, Kiko, is pockets. Pockets, man. We ain't going to be accepted everywhere. And I think a lot of us are starting to realize it. There's racists everywhere. Think about some of the towns in Wyomings of the world. You just mentioned Alabama, Georgia, certain parts of Indiana. Certain parts of the country we just won't be accepted in, no matter how much we try. As a Black man, we're kind of taught to accept things and I would say turn the other cheek. We kind of get used and adapted to racism and oppression. In this current time when you're experiencing and seeing, direct opposition to such a movement that's so powerful and positive, as a Black man, are you more apt to, lash out and say something to these people? Or are you even more reserved in this time because you know the temperaments that are out there?
Well, I think personally, I kind of go back and forth, because as an academic, you work in a particular field that kind of demands measure and reflection, right? But still, on the other hand, you can't help but get emotional sometimes, right? And when you see certain racist acts and expressions, so it's easy to get drawn into that, and it's easy to react. And I think that's initially what brought me, or what took me to the streets, right, to protest. But I'm empowered by that. I'm empowered by what I see. When I turn on the news and I see that a certain CEO who has hurled racial epithets at someone has had to resign. I think those things kind of motivate us all to call out those racist acts, to make sure that people are being held accountable, and to go out and be active anti-racist. So yeah, I think for me personally, there are two sides of this issue. One that demands that I go to the classroom and I try to teach my students to resist and fight against racism in all forms. You can't help but respond, right, in a human way. And that's not, no, it's certainly not just turning the other cheek.
Anything you could add there to a young Black man just trying to understand how to react when experience this opposition these days?
Yes, I think you have to really test it spatially. Sometimes you have to pick and choose your battles very carefully. But I must say that after the Floyd murder, I said that I was not going to get on social media at all for the whole month of June, just out of respect, because I didn't want to see a bunch of garbage on social media and a lot of people's opinions about it. But I have to say that I had so much ire and anger that I did go on social media, and I put up a video. And I've been a lot more aggressive, I think, even more so than I am, because I'm usually one of those types that a lot of my posts, probably 80% of them, are about social issues anyway on Facebook and these different platforms. But when I go out in public, I must say that I'm treated a lot more positively. And I think it goes back to the question you posed initially about interracial relations. I think the fact that I'm in an interracial marriage gives me somewhat of a light of positivity towards the public, because when I go out with my kids, people smile at me more, I notice, if I'm with my kids, because it signals to them, oh, that's an active Black dad. And it goes against the stereotype of the deadbeat Black dad that's not involved in the person's life. So there's just so many different levels to it. But in public, I'm a lot more careful. I don't trust really people as much as I did before. I really don't. It's hard to trust people, when these types of situations happen and people are telling you, I'm not going to join your side. I'm not going to join your side of advocacy. I'm going to continue living this way because I don't have to stick myself out in the sand and do things to help people out. And that's fine. You have a privilege to do that. But as a Black person, I don't have that privilege. I'm visible, and I'm always chancing my life, as Bruce is as well, and yourself. So we don't have the luxury to be quiet. We have to be active.
I think Kiko is right. We do not have the luxury of standing idly by and folding our arms. But at the same time, I think we have to be cognizant. We have to be aware of the kind of restraints, right, that are socially placed on to Black professionals, right? Kiko, I think you would agree, right, that African American men and women are generally not allowed to be upset, allowed to be angry, right? Yeah, there's certain stereotypes and connotations that go along with that kind of aggressiveness, right?
So for sure.
So there's certainly privilege to be had, specifically for white people who are allowed to be angry, right, about certain things that Black people simply aren't allowed to be angry about, right? Because you come off as belligerent and the angry, you talk about the angry black woman or the thuggish, right, black guy. So it's we have to be careful with that, and we have to know how to manage our emotions and feelings. I often hear about the term respectability, right, and how to be respectable in order to gain a kind of acceptance, right, or legitimacy. But I have pushed against that in the last couple of weeks, right, and the protests and even on social media, right. I've pushed back on that. But you have to be careful, I think. We just have to be realistic and take note of that, because it costs, right? There are certain risks in showing your true self, especially in academia, right? And allowing oneself to be vulnerable in that sense. There are risks, and I think most Black professionals are keenly aware of those risks.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Is academia, is every facet of life, especially social life. When you interact with people, we have this intense pressure placed on us as people of color to behave a certain way. Take Exhibit A that we have in office. Could you imagine Obama behaving like that?
Right.
Obama would have never been in office. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like the sort of posturing that's allowed from the white male hegemonic system, that's just not available for Black men and women and people of color.
Man, that's a whole, we could get into that all day. But it's clear, man, Black people are hurting, Black men are hurting. And something Bruce said earlier is, I like the comment that you were planning on staying off of social media, but this was such a catastrophic event. Like I can go back to the mindset of me watching the actual video. Like before I even saw a bunch of social reactions, I saw the video early, and I had planned on just watching it, maybe fast forward into what happened. But it was so gripping, man. It was so real that this man is laying on the ground, and we really have to get back into that. But it's important that we're conscious of this emotional state that we're in, because we do have that tendency to lash out and react in negative ways. We just have to realize that we're hurting, and it's okay.
I'll add that, as much as I would like to say that allowing our emotions to become heightened and allowing our actions to be, governed by those emotions in a negative way, as much as I would like to say that, that should be avoided, I often ask, whose interest does that kind of behavior serve, right? When we're told to act a certain way, when we're told to protest peacefully, right? Who are we trying to make comfortable? So I often, think in those terms, and I push against them sometimes, because I know that in the imagery, I think of most older white Americans, right? The protests, the peaceful protests of the 60s is what a lot of them would like to see. And I think, there's some nostalgia in there, for certain people. But I also think that at certain times, heightened emotions can also be effective. And of course, I'm not advocating for violence or anything like that, but I do think that we should always keep in mind whose interests are we actually serving when we're being peaceful, good little soldiers.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. And it's clear, though, that we have to start the healing process in some fashion. We have to start creating change. And it's believed to me that's clear. It comes through learning and growth. So you guys, giving you both an education, we've talked a lot of HBCUs on this show. And the more we talk about it, I kind of start to see that as an end goal. But I think it has to start earlier than that, earlier than when we're making that decision for college. So what I asked you guys, what age do you think that Black education should start? And is this something that's in school, outside of school? You know, what can you guys say to that?
Well, I'll just say quickly that I don't think Black education has any, age limit. And I think, first of all, we have to ask, like, what is Black education?
True.
There are so many, I think there's just so many aspects of Black education that are tied into our experience, right? It doesn't have to be education in the traditional sense. I can remember certain, songs or certain aspects of Black culture that I learned as a child that had nothing to do with traditional forms of education. So I don't necessarily think that there is a specific age for tapping into Black education, and I would argue that we learn what it means and what it is and what it feels like to be Black from, I don't know, I would say from early on. So I don't know if you can put an age or number to it, but I would certainly, if we want to think in terms of traditional education, just as early as kids start school. I mean, we learn certain traditions of the mainstream American history early on, right? The Pledge of Allegiance, for example. But I didn't learn the what we call the Black Anthem until I was around 12 or 13. So
I'll give you a number. How about school age? 6, 7 years old, because our experiences in life, we have to learn things at an earlier pace because we're confronted with that pressure at an early age from the outside, from society. And so my parents told me the importance of myself and my identity at a very young age. I probably got about topics like sex at an earlier age than most people did. But I think most Blacks have that sort of understanding anyway, because we're confronted with such violence and aggression and resistance. And so you have to program yourself when you're growing up. When you raise kids, they need to know things at an earlier age. Kids are innocent, yes, but kids don't need to be innocent to the world too, because they're growing up in a cruel world. That's just like my parents. They gave me a book when I was around 10 years old. It was called The Pictorial History of Black America. Ebony published it. It's a 3-part series, and that book changed my life because I could see myself represented in that book. This history was never been taught in our schools. We were not taught about Juneteenth. I knew about Juneteenth when I was a kid because I read that book. And so people this year are just now discovering what Juneteenth meant. Black people, some of them are. And that tells you how limiting our education really is. So I think the earlier the better.
Well, Kiko, I want to go back to something you said, because you mentioned violence, right? And I think this goes back to the point that I was trying to make earlier about the idea of education and what do we mean when we say education? Because of course, talking about violence is a different kind of education, I think. And I've talked about this before with other colleagues, especially when, for example, someone mentions the specific talks, that parents have to have with their children about violence and racism, right? That can be thought of as a kind of education. But I think it's also interesting that at least for me, when I was a kid, my parents never had to have that conversation with me because it was already internalized, right? It was already something that I'd seen. There's no need to say, watch out or don't antagonize the police or these these things that you hear from parents nowadays are certainly experiences that I had already seen at an early age. So no one really ever had to sit down and talk to me. My parents never had to tell me, like, hey, when you're stopped by the police, make sure they can see your hands, make sure you answer their questions, don't talk back, all of these things that you that you hear now. And that's not to say that no one was doing it, 35 years ago. It's just that where I grew up, it was already something you saw and it was internalized, and there was no reason to be told how to behave in front of the policeman, right, or the police, because you saw it because of the neighborhood that where you grew up. So that's what I mean when I say education can be. I mean, depending on the kind of education that you're referring to, it could be taught early on.
When we talk Black education these days, it's more so about the Black experiences and how to cope and how to adapt with that. Not necessarily the history. Now, we have to learn from the past and the ones before us, of course, but we almost have to shift the focus onto the current times and the future. And a book tip I just want to throw out to all the listeners is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that title, but
I am.
Oh man, that book pretty much sums this convo up in a nutshell. So we're in an election year, and we kind of talk about Trump and his antics, to say the least. There's a lot of information out there, and listeners, I want you guys to keep perspective. We are in an election year, so despite all the hoopla and what's going on in the media, this Joe Biden is the Democratic candidate, which is the self-appointed Black leader, if you ask the media. What do you guys say is the true meaning of a Joe Biden election? And of course, this is opinionated, this is political. But in you guys' opinion, is this a positive? Is this a negative? Who is Joe Biden to Black people?
Kiko, I'll let you tackle that one.
Oh gosh, we could be here all day for this question.
Heavy.
I have a lot to say about this guy, but I'll say this much. I've been in close talks with about 10 other Black people. 5 of them are going to support him, and 5 of them are not going to support him. They're not going to support Trump, but we're probably going to write someone else in or something like that, because the problem with Biden is that, and it kind of scares me in a way, like we're in a catch-22. If Trump gets in again, I think that there may be even more of a chance for Black advocacy under a repeat of Trump than under Biden. I think with Biden, I think it's going to be complacent. I think white liberals in particular are going to give themselves a pat on the back. We've seen this story before, and this stuff is going to be pushed even more under the rug, because when people vote, they don't think about Black interest at all anyway. I was listening to a 538 Politics podcast from May 26th, and Michael Cohen, he's a managing editor from 538 Politics, he quotes a political scientist study as saying, as white support increases from 0 to 100%, the likelihood of adoption of policy preferences increases from roughly 10% to 60%. In other words, the more support that you get from white people, the more likely a politician will present their interest. As Black support rises from 0 to 100%, the odds of enactment fall from 40 to 30%. That tells you right there that people are not pushing our issues in the forefront. Reparations, there's no discussion about reparations. There was a bill that Representative Sheila Jackson from Texas, she put into Congress, I think last year. I think it's called HR 40. She put that in, but it's just a study to sort of see if this could work with reparations. But there's never any sort of policy that talks about reparations, education disparities in Black communities, all these things that I feel like affect us, they're never brought to the Democratic cause. We're basically used as pawns when it comes to election time. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. I understand that it's a lesser of two evils environment that we're in, but how long is this going to continue when we just looked over again?
Well, I'd say, it looks like Biden is who, we have, as in opposition to Donald Trump. So I'm not as optimistic as I would have been under circumstances, but he is the Democratic nominee. So I often wonder, though, will he be able to fix or at least address the racial divide. I know what we cannot do is, as a people, right? What we can't do is let's say, Biden wins in November. I mean, what we cannot do is throw our hands in the air and say, okay, we're done, right? We are now free of Donald Trump, and we can all go back to our quote unquote post-racial society. I mean, we cannot do that. I don't think that is an option. I think 4 years of race baiting and not having a cabinet or administration that reflects the diversity of this country. I think we're all kind of tired of that, and we want to see change. But I often wonder if Biden will be the president to usher in the change that I think we're demanding at this moment.
It sounds like regardless of who wins, it's clear the fight ain't over, whether it's Trump, Biden. But Kiko, Bruce, any final words for the people today before we get off?
Well, I do have something, I guess, words for you. I'm happy to have collaborated with you, and I want to thank you for providing this forum, the Black Voice. I think it's important work that you're doing now, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you guys for joining me. Absolutely. I think the people definitely been in great company today. We had two great guests, Bruce and Kiko, with us. So I appreciate you guys coming on, sharing your perspective, and helping us educate.
Thank you so much, Jay.
No doubt. And don't forget, guys, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at BlackVoiceJ. Of course, subscribe and rate us on Spotify and Apple just to help us reach more people out there. And of course, the voice box is always open 24/7. Visit anchor.fm/BlackVoiceJ. Find the messages tab and record something to be heard on future episodes. So I thank you guys all for tuning in today. This is the Black Voice. Peace. Thank you for tuning in to the Black Voice, where we motivate and promote change for Black culture. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and rate on any platform that you're listening on to help us reach more people. Also, don't forget to participate. Visit anchor.fm/BlackVoiceJ, hit message, and be heard on future episodes. There's power in numbers, there's power in communication, and together we shall surely rise. This is the Black Voice with Jay Clark. Peace.